We are witnessing a pivotal moment in time. One of those once-in-history moments where years from now, we will look back and reflect how this time shifted and altered our course, how we rose to the challenge, and how we reckoned with the past. The events of the past 18 months, the pandemic, racial reckoning with the death and murder of George Floyd, the Capitol insurrection, climate crisis, humanitarian crisis here and abroad. It has all put a spotlight on the ways in which white supremacy is literally built into every system, industry, and institution in this country, if not the world. And in the United States specifically, we have seen a rising consciousness that we are, in fact, a country that is built, make no mistake, very intentionally, in a racist construct. So while businesses and organizations published performative solidarity statements, some shifting internal practices, others making donations to BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color organization, there was one institution that remains embedded in its oppressive practices and frameworks. That institution is philanthropy. Now, to take a look at philanthropy, you can't just look at the giving. You gotta pull back the layers and see what's going on inside. In 2020, Philanthropy News Digest created a survey. And in this survey, they found of all national foundations across the US, only 10.2% of CEOs, presidents, or leaders of these foundations were people of color. And in 2016, that exact same survey was taken 4 years earlier. Absolutely no change whatsoever. And of the 703 foundations that actually took the time to respond to the questions about disability, it was found that of those foundations, only 7% employ a person with a disability. So, at the end of the day, it's a numbers game, because you can hire as many people of color as you would like, you can hire as many people with a disability as you like, but if they aren't at the decision-making table, y'all, the outcomes don't change. They simply don't. And I offer this data, but I also offer this from my own personal lived experience as a woman of color who has been both in and out of philanthropy, as a grantee, as a program officer, and yes, as a board member of a foundation. And I can tell you, I have spent much too much of my career being the only in the boardroom, being only in the meeting, being the only on the Zoom call. And as a woman who runs an organization across 14 states in the South, when I hear a data point that tells me that less than 5% of all national funding that is driven to the South, less than 5% of all national funding, you tell me, does philanthropy have a problem? So a couple weeks ago, I was approached by a very prestigious national foundation and asked to apply to be a community trustee. I was humbled, I was excited, but wow, how exciting that this foundation was going to do something progressive with its grant making. But as I walked through that process with that foundation, it became very clear to me that while that foundation had the best of intentions, and I really do believe they did, their old ways of thinking and their old ways of working just kept rearing their ugly heads. From the inability to understand when you ask someone to come from a community that is underserved, that perhaps compensation should be considered. From not understanding when you take someone away from their home institution, an institution especially that is run by a brown or Black person, those institutions' capacity and resources are scarce due to philanthropy. And finally, I was asked or told that if I served as a community trustee, my organization would be completely prohibited from applying for funding from that foundation. Full stop. For as long as I served in that role. So I basically was forced to make a decision, a choice between doing something I felt that was in my best interest and in doing something that I felt compelled to serve, and choosing between that and what was in the best interest of my organization and my community. And of course, I picked my community, and I had to rescind my application. You know, there are philanthropists like the Mackenzie Scotts of the world who are making bold moves to help reflect philanthropy, the things that they need to let go of. Letting go of things like metrics, measurables, data, barriers, hoops to jump through, endless reporting requirements, and frankly, firstborn children just to get funding. The rest of philanthropy hasn't caught up with this. They don't quite yet trust the communities they serve, and they definitely aren't ready to have a conversation about reparations for the years and years of disinvestment, especially in brown and black communities. So now, I would like to invite you to come with me on a little journey to a place that I like to call Decolonanthropy land. It's a lovely, liberated place that, for the moment, only lives in my imagination. But come on, let's take a look and see what philanthropy could look like if it really wanted to embrace equity and justice. So first, we are going to go to the matching meridian. Matching meridian is where a foundation takes an internal audit of all of the funding they've given to predominantly white institutions over the course of their history. They get that dollar figure, they match it, and for the coming decades, that money gets moved to organizations, institutions, people, and areas of the country that they have historically disinvested from as an act of reparations. Next, the dividend divide. This might look like a foundation not just giving grant money, but maybe a little portion of the stock in their financial portfolio to a grantee, allowing them to start amassing wealth and having power, sharing power. Speaking of power, let's go to the avenue of power. This is where 50% of all board seats are held by BIPOC people from the communities that foundation wishes to serve. Freedom Freeway. We're just going to take a quick stop here. This is super easy. No strings attached funding. Full stop. That's it. Cul-de-sac of community-controlled funds. This is where a foundation liberates its endowment annually, gives that money to community, and lets the community do with it as it sees fit. The interstate of increased giving. This moves the dial from the 3 to 5 to 6% that most foundations give annually over to 25%. And again, you guessed it, moves that money into areas, communities that it is disinvested in over its history. Education Alley. Not gonna lie, perhaps my favorite place in Decolonanthropy land, because this is where foundations have to take a hard look and be accountable for their role and giving architecture that has created the disparity that we see in the nonprofit sector today. But not only that, their leaders, their presidents, their CEOs have to do their own work to unearth their biases, their internalized racism, and their privilege. And finally, Collaboration Causeway, because we know foundations love nothing more than to pit organizations against each other. And this is so unhealthy because that requires organizations to not share data, knowledge. It's a toxic practice that disincentivizes transparency, and it requires organizations to remain small, isolated, and insular. Time and time again, we have seen when communities have ownership, to the solutions for the challenges that they are facing, they thrive. So I invite you to take a look at your own internalized, colonized mindsets. And if defensiveness and not curiosity is the first thing that came up for you when you heard the words white supremacy and philanthropy in the same sentence together, that is worth paying attention to. And maybe asking yourself why. Decolonization starts with the individual, and until each and every one of us does the work on ourselves, we will never be able to realize a philanthropic world that rights past wrongs and moves us and giving in a direction of authenticity, intention, and justice. So I ask you today, philanthropy, how will you embrace this moment? Thank you.